stormy night. It was a sticky August evening, the kind where the air clung to your skin, and the cicadas sang their relentless songs. Thunderstorms had rolled in earlier, and the sky was a swirling canvas of dark gray and violet. I was home alone for the first time overnight. The thrill of it made my heart beat a little faster. I was 13, and my parents had just started trusting me enough to leave me alone while they visited my aunt 2 towns over. "You know the rules, David," my mom had said, her face serious but kind. "No leaving the house, no visitors, and if anything happens, call us right away." "Got it, Mom," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. My dad ruffled my hair, and they both headed out into the growing storm. As the rumble of their car faded into the distance, I closed the door and locked. The house was mine for the night. A sense of freedom mixed with an edge of unease settled over me. I had big plans. Move the Xbox downstairs, hook it up to the big TV, and play video games until my eyes bled. But first, I decided to enjoy the storm. There was something about thunderstorms that always fascinated me. A sort of primal energy that made the world feel alive and dangerous. I went out to the front porch, the wooden boards creaking under my weight. The wind was picking up, rattling the chimes that hung from the porch roof. I could smell the rain before it started. Clean, earthy scent mixed with something else, something that reminded me of my grandfather. He had passed away a few years ago, but his memory was still vivid. He had a distinct scent, a mix of old leather, tobacco, and something sweet like vanilla. I missed him, especially during nights like these when I could have used his company. The first raindrops started to fall, fat and heavy, splashing against the pavement and creating tiny craters in the dust. The thunder was getting louder, rolling across the sky like the approach of some ancient beast. I leaned against the porch railing, letting the cool rain mist my face. "David, get in here. It's gonna pour." Cody's voice crackled through the headset hanging around my neck. He was my best friend, and we had planned to meet online as soon as I was ready. "Hold on, Cody. Just watching the storm for a bit." "You're weird, man. Get inside before you get struck by lightning." I laughed, but decided he was right. I was getting soaked, and the rain was coming down harder now, drumming on the roof and splashing against the windows. I stepped back into the house, screen door slamming shut behind me. The living room was dark, save for the occasional flash of lightning that lit up the room in stark white light. I shivered a little, more from the excitement than the cold. I moved my Xbox from my room to the den, the downstairs room with the biggest TV. My dad's prized flat screen was mounted on the wall, and it was the only time I was allowed to use it without supervision. I set everything up, hooked up the Bose sound system, and turned the volume up to a level that would have my dad scolding me if he were home. The game booted up, and I lost myself in the virtual world. The storm outside was a perfect backdrop to the chaos on the screen. I was playing some online multiplayer game, chatting with Cody as we ran through the map, hunting down enemies. "Yo, that was a sick shot," Cody yelled as I took out an opponent from a distance. "Thanks, man. I've been practicing," I replied, grinning. The sound of the rain pounding on the roof was drowned out by the explosions and gunfire coming from the speakers. I was in the zone, my fingers moving fast over the controller, when the doorbell rang. I paused, the sound jarring against the backdrop of the storm and the game. Who could that be at this hour? It was almost 9 p.m., and the storm outside was getting worse. I told Cody about it. "Dude, who's at your door this late?" Cody asked, his voice tinged with concern. "I don't know. My parents aren't due back until tomorrow." "Maybe it's them then. They would have called if they were coming home early, right?" "Yeah, probably. But my parents wouldn't ring the doorbell. They had keys." I stood up, feeling a knot of unease form in my stomach. I put the controller down and started toward the door, but then I hesitated. Maybe I should just ignore it. After all, it was probably someone lost. Maybe their car broke down in the storm. But then the doorbell rang again, more insistent this time. I felt a shiver run down my spine. I moved to the front door, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floor. The house felt too quiet, too empty. I stood in front of the door, the rain hammering down on the roof just above me. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice wavering slightly. For a moment there was nothing but the sound of the storm. Then a voice answered from the other side, deep and rough. "I need to use your phone. My car broke down." Something about the voice made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It wasn't just that it was deep, there was something off about it, something that sent a chill down my spine. "I can't help you," I stammered. "Sorry." There was a long silence, and I thought for a moment that whoever it was had gone. But then the voice came again, more forceful this time. "Come on, kid. Just let me in. I'm stranded out here." I backed away from the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew I shouldn't open the door, but I had already made a mistake. I had let whoever was out there know that I was home alone. I turned and ran back to the den, grabbing the controller and putting the headset back on. "Cody, someone's at my door," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is it your parents?" he asked. "No, it's some guy. He says he needs to use the phone." "Don't open the door, man. Just ignore him." Yeah, you're right." But then, the doorbell rang again, and this time it was followed by a loud banging on the door. The sound echoed through the house, making my blood run cold. I told Cody about it, and he cursed under his breath. "Yo, what the hell? Just stay put, dude. Don't open that door." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. My heart was racing now, my palms sweaty as I gripped the controller. I tried to focus on the game, tried to lose myself in the familiar sounds and sights, but it was no use. My mind kept drifting back to the front door, with the man standing out there in the storm. The doorbell rang again, and this time it was accompanied by the sound of something heavy being dragged across the porch. My blood turned to ice as I realized that whoever was out there wasn't leaving. I stood up, my hands trembling as I moved toward the door again. I didn't know what I was going to do. My parents had always told me to never open the door to strangers, but I couldn't just ignore this. What if the man was really in trouble? I reached the door, my hand hovering over the doorknob. I could hear my own breathing, fast and shallow, and the pounding of my heart in my ears. I took a deep breath and opened the door a crack, just enough to peer outside. The man was standing on the porch, his face obscured by the shadows. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a hunched posture. His clothes were soaked through, clinging to his body like a second skin. He leaned in closer, and I caught a glimpse of his face, pale, gaunt, with deep-set eyes that gleamed in the darkness. "Please, kid, just let me in for a minute," he said, his voice low and desperate. "I just need to use the phone." I hesitated, my hand gripping the door so tightly that my knuckles turned white. There was something wrong with this man, something that made every instinct in my body scream at me to run. I can't," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You need to leave." The man's face twisted into a snarl, and he slammed his hand against the door, making me jump back in fear. "Open the door," he roared, his voice echoing through the house. I slammed the door shut and locked it, my hands shaking so badly that I could barely turn the key. I backed away, my heart racing, and ran to the den, slamming that door behind me too. "Bodhi, I'm freaking out, man. He's trying to get in," I said, my voice trembling. "Get out of there, David. Run to a neighbor's house or something." I didn't finish my sentence. A loud crash came from the front of the house, followed by the sound of glass shattering. My blood turned to ice. He was breaking in. I dropped the controller and ran to the office, slamming the door shut behind me and locking it. The room was dark, only light coming from the computer monitor on the desk. I stood there, my back against the door, trying to calm my racing heart. For a moment, there was silence, broken only by the sound of the rain and the occasional roll of thunder. Then I heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming down the hall toward the office. "Little boy," the man called out, his voice eerily calm now. "I just need to use your phone. I'm stranded in the rain." I pressed myself against the door, my mind racing. The office had two doors, one leading to the den, and the other to the garage. My only chance of escape was through the garage, but I was too scared to move. The doorknob rattled, and I bit back a scream. He was trying to get in. "Open the door," he growled, his voice growing more agitated. "Open the fucking door." I had to move. I couldn't stay here. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and bolted for the garage door. I fumbled with the lock, my hands shaking. Finally got it open. I hit the button to open the garage door, praying that it would be quiet enough that the man wouldn't hear it. The door started to rise, creaking as it did. It was painfully slow, each second feeling like an eternity. I could hear the man pounding on the office door now, shouting obscenities as he tried to break it down. Come on, I silently urged the garage door. It was up halfway now, and I could see the storm raging outside. The rain was coming down in sheets, the wind howling through the trees. I didn't care. I dropped to my hands and knees and crawled under the door, into the storm. As soon as I was outside, I took off running, my feet splashing through the puddles as I sprinted down the street. The rain was blinding, and the wind whipped at my face, but I didn't stop. I had to get to a neighbor's house, had to find help. I saw a light on a few houses down and made a beeline for it, my lungs burning from the effort. It was Julian's house. He was an older man who lived alone, and I knew he'd help me. I reached the front door and pounded on it, glancing back over my shoulder at my house. The garage door was still open, but I didn't see anyone coming out. Please, Julian, open the door, I thought, desperate. Finally, the door swung open, and Julian stood there, his face a mix of concern and confusion. David, what are you doing out here in this storm? Someone's in my house, I cried, throwing myself into his arms. He broke in. He was trying to get me. Julian's expression changed instantly, and he pulled me inside, slamming the door shut behind me. Stay here, he said, grabbing his phone. I'm calling the police. I stood in the hallway, dripping wet and shaking with fear. Julian's house was warm and safe, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the man was still out there, that he would find me. Julian spoke into the phone, his voice calm and authoritative. Yes, this is Julian Knight. I've got a young boy here, David Harris. He says there's an intruder in his house. We're at 227 Maple Street. Please send someone right away. He hung up the phone and turned to me, his expression serious. The police are on their way, David. Don't worry, you're safe here. But I wasn't sure. The storm outside was still raging, and I couldn't shake the image of the man's gaunt, pale face from my mind. He had broken into my house, and I had no idea who he was or what he wanted. We waited in tense silence, the only sound the rain pounding on the roof and the occasional rumble of thunder. Felt like hours before the red and blue lights of a police car flashed outside. Julian opened the door, and 2 officers stepped inside, shaking the rain from their jacket. Where's the boy? One of them asked. Right here, Julian said, guiding them to where I was standing. I told them everything, from the moment the doorbell rang to my escape through the garage. They listened intently, their faces grim. When I mentioned the garage door being left open, one of the officers turned to the other. Check it out. I'll stay here with the kid. The other officer nodded and headed back outside, disappearing into the storm. The remaining officer knelt down to my level, his expression softening. You did the right thing, David. You're safe now. But I wasn't sure. My house was just down the street. I couldn't shake the feeling that the man was still there, waiting. Julian put a reassuring hand on my shoulder. It's okay, David. The police will take care of everything. I nodded, trying to believe him. Minutes passed, each one dragging on as the storm raged outside. Finally, the officer who had gone to check the house returned, his face pale. We found him, he said, his voice low. He was hiding in the garage. My heart skipped a beat. Did you arrest him? The officer nodded. Yes, we've got him in custody. We'll take him down to the station and notify your parents. Did he say anything? Julian asked, his brow furrowed. The officer hesitated, glancing at me before answering. He was confused, kept insisting that this was his house, that the boy was his son. He didn't seem to be in his right mind. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. The man had been claiming that I was his son? What kind of twisted delusion was he living in? Don't worry, the officer said, noticing the fear on my face. We'll make sure he doesn't bother you again. But the reassurance did little to calm the fear gnawing at my inside. The man had been in my house, and he had tried to get to me. Even with him in custody, I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't done with me. Julian let me stay the night at his house, and I didn't sleep a wink. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind made me jump. I kept expecting to see that gaunt face peering at me from the shadows. When morning came, my parents rushed back from my aunt's house. They were pale and frantic, hugging me tight and asking a million questions. I told them everything, and they promised me that we'd install more locks, get a security system, do whatever it took to make sure I felt safe again. But I knew that no amount of locks or alarms would erase the memory of that man, of the fear I felt when he tried to break down the door. A few weeks later, we found out more about the man who had broken into our house. His name was John McCarty, a drifter who had been in and out of mental institution. He had a history of delusions, often believing he was someone else or that he had a family that didn't exist. My parents pressed charges, and McCarty was sent to a state hospital for treatment. I tried to put it all behind me, but the nightmares persisted. I kept seeing his face, hearing his voice, and feeling his presence in the house. I never felt truly safe again. Every time a storm rolled in, I would find myself staring at the door, waiting for the doorbell to ring, for the nightmare to start all over again. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls and the rain pounds against the windows, I think I hear his voice whispering from the darkness, "Little boy, let me in." The storm that never ended. I never thought in a million years that anything truly horrific would ever happen to me. I'm an average person with a life so uneventful that anything out of the ordinary would stand out like a beacon. That's why I always felt comfortable watching horror movies, listening to creepy stories on YouTube, and diving into the eerie world of creepypasta. The thrill was always there, but it was safe, or at least, it used to be. Now, after what happened, those stories terrify me in a way I never thought possible. It all started on a night that seemed no different from any other. It was around 4 a.m., and everyone else in the house was asleep. My mother and both of my grandparents. For the past couple of months, we had been getting at least one major thunderstorm each week. This one had decided to start earlier that night, and it was a monster. I've always enjoyed a good thunderstorm, especially at night. There's something mesmerizing about sitting by the window, watching the lightning dance across the sky. But the wind, that's something that's always unsettled me. It can be soft and gentle one moment, and then suddenly become deafening, as if the very air around you is trying to tear your world apart. This night's storm was one of the worst we'd had in a long time. It sounded like rocks were pelting against my window, and the wind howled like a beast in agony. But despite the chaos outside, I was content, nestled under my blankets, scrolling through Reddit on my phone. That's when the power went out. 1 second, everything was fine, and then the next, I was plunged into complete darkness. I'm not gonna lie, it was creepy, but I didn't panic. I had my phone, a decent charge, and mobile data. I could keep browsing, keep my mind occupied. After a while though, fatigue started to creep in. I figured it was time to get some sleep. So I placed my phone on the side table and rolled over, hoping to drift off despite the storm still raging outside. I must have fallen asleep pretty quickly because the next thing I remember was the eerie silence. The rain had stopped and the wind had died down to a soft whisper. I rolled over, trying to get more comfortable, but I couldn't ignore the parched feeling in my mouth. I tried to fall back asleep, but it wasn't happening. My throat was too dry. I needed water. Reluctantly, I sat up, grabbed my phone, and turned on the flashlight. The light cut through the darkness, guiding me as I made my way to the kitchen. The moment I opened my bedroom door, I was hit by a blast of cold air. It was freezing in the living room, way colder than it should have been. I quickly threw on a sweater and continued to the kitchen, chill gnawing at my nerves. As I approached the kitchen, I noticed something strange. The wind seemed louder, and the temperature kept dropping. I reached the kitchen and froze. The door to the patio was wide open. A wave of fear washed over me. My mind raced through the possibility. Had someone broken in? Was someone still inside? I forced myself to stay calm. Maybe my grandfather had left it open earlier and just forgot to close it. It was a reasonable explanation, but it didn't ease the knot of dread forming in my stomach. I walked over to the sliding door, glancing over my shoulder out of sheer paranoia, and slid it shut, locking it. Fear that someone might be in the house gnawed at me, but I tried to push it aside. I told myself I was just being paranoid. Fast walked back to my room, shut the door behind me, and locked it, good measure. Placed the glass of water on my side table, my hand shaking slightly as I did so. The house was silent, save for the soft whine of the wind outside. I laid back down, still clutching my phone like a lifeline, flashlight casting shadows across the walls. Tried to relax, to let the familiar comfort of my bed lull me back to sleep. The unease wouldn't go away. Something inside me kept screaming there might be someone in the house, that I hadn't checked well enough. With a sigh, I got out of bed again and dragged a chair over to the door, wedging it under the knob to keep anyone from coming in. I checked the closet one more time, just to be sure, then laid back down, my heart still pounding in my chest. I kept the flashlight on this time, like a makeshift nightlight, and that's when it happened. I felt a slight bump from underneath my bed, followed by the creak of bed springs. My breath caught in my throat. I hadn't checked under the bed. My stomach churned with fear. I leaned over the side of the bed, shining the flashlight into the darkness beneath. What I saw will haunt me for the rest of my life. There, staring back at me from under the bed, was an emaciated woman. Her skin was pale and stretched tight over her bones, her eyes bloodshot and her teeth yellowed and jagged. It was her smile that terrified me the most, a wide, unnatural grin that seemed to stretch from ear to ear. We locked eyes for what felt like an eternity, though it was probably only a few seconds. Then she cackled, a high-pitched maniacal laugh that sent shivers down my spine. I didn't think, I just moved. I leapt out of bed and sprinted to the door, knocking the chair aside. My hand fumbled with the lock, but I managed to get it open and bolted down the hall to my grandparents. Grandpa, Grandpa, I screamed, banging on the door with all my might. Within seconds, my grandfather threw open the door, look of confusion and concern on his face. He held a gun in his hand, something I'd never even known he had in the house. "There's someone in my room," I cried, tears streaming down my face. She was under my bed. Without a word, my grandfather moved past me, gun at the ready. My grandmother followed close behind, her face pale with fear. I trailed after them, my heart pounding in my ears. When we reached my room, my grandfather moved cautiously inside, his eyes scanning every corner. It was too late. As we entered, we caught a glimpse of a white figure slipping out the window and disappearing into the night. My grandfather fired a shot into the darkness. A warning, the figure was gone. We didn't call the police. My grandparents figured there wasn't much they could do. We didn't have security cameras, and we had no idea who the woman was or what she wanted. Over the next few days, we had new locks installed on all the windows and doors. My grandfather even installed a security system, something we'd never felt the need for before. But none of it helped me sleep at night. The nightmares started soon after. I'd see her face every time I closed my eyes, her twisted grin haunting me. I started sleeping with the lights on, but even that didn't help. The fear was always there, gnawing at the edges of my sanity. I tried to tell myself that it was over. She was gone. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. A few weeks later, I learned the truth. I was sitting in the living room, trying to focus on a book when my grandfather came in looking more serious than I'd ever seen him. "David, we need to talk," he said, voice heavy. I looked up at him, my stomach twisting with unease. "What's wrong?" He sat down across from me, his eyes filled with a mix of sorrow and determination. I did some digging. I found out who that woman was. My blood ran cold. "Who was she?" "She was a patient at a nearby mental institution," he began, his voice low. "She escaped a few months ago. They've been looking for her ever since, but she's been hiding out in the area." I felt like I was going to be sick. "Why was she in our house?" My grandfather hesitated, as if he wasn't sure how to say what he needed to say. "David, she thought this was her house. She was convinced that you were her son." The room started to spin. I could barely process what he was telling me. "What? She lost her son in a car accident years ago," my grandfather explained. "After that, she had a mental breakdown. She started believing that her son was still alive, that he was hiding from her. When she saw the light in your room, she must have thought that you were him." The horror of it all crashed down on me like a wave. This woman, this disturbed, broken woman, had been living in a nightmare of her own. And in that nightmare, I was her son. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still out there, still searching for her son. And sometimes, on stormy nights, when the wind howls and the rain pounds against the windows, I think I can hear her voice calling out from the darkness. David? Where are you, David? And that's when I know she's never going to stop looking. The night of the storm. The wind howled like a wild beast, rattling the windows of the small mobile home as Cass and I sat huddled together on the worn-out couch. It was August, height of summer, but the storm that had rolled in from nowhere had turned the air cold and filled the sky with dark, menacing clouds. Our plan for a peaceful weekend getaway in the countryside quickly turned into something out of a nightmare. I had always loved our family's rustic mobile home, nestled deep in the woods upstate. It was a simple place, just one bedroom, a small living room with a pull-out couch, a bathroom, and a tiny kitchen. It was the kind of place where you could disconnect from the world, where the only sounds were the rustling of leaves and the occasional call of a distant bird. But tonight, those peaceful sounds had been replaced by the relentless roar of the storm. Cass and I had arrived on Friday, excited for a weekend of archery, dirt biking, and just relaxing away from the hustle of the city. The mobile home had running water, electricity, and even a small TV with a DVD player. We joked that it was luxury camping, and it kind of was. After unpacking and settling in, we went out to eat, did some grocery shopping, and then spent the evening curled up on the couch, watching movies as the first rumblings of thunder echoed in the distance. By Saturday, the storm had fully arrived. The sky was an angry shade of gray, and the air was thick with the promise of rain. We spent the morning enjoying the activities we had planned, but by afternoon, the clouds had darkened, and we could feel the storm building. Deciding it was better to be safe than sorry, we packed away our gear and retreated inside just as the first fat drops of rain began to fall. As the rain turned into a torrential downpour, we made dinner together, the sound of the storm outside growing louder with each passing minute. By the time we sat down to eat, the thunder was crashing directly overhead, and the flashes of lightning were so bright they lit up the entire sky. It was the kind of storm that made you feel small and insignificant, a reminder of the raw power of nature. We decided to sit outside on the deck under the small canopy to watch the storm, despite the rain. It was exhilarating, the lightning streaking across the sky in jagged lines, the thunder booming so close it felt like the ground was shaking. Cass and I held hands, enjoying the thrill of being right in the heart of the storm. But then, we heard it. A voice, faint at first, but unmistakable. Someone was out in the woods, calling out. The sound was garbled by the wind and rain, but it was definitely a voice. "Did you hear that?" Cass asked, her grip on my hand tightening. "Yeah," I replied, straining to listen over the roar of the storm. "It's probably just a hiker. Maybe they got lost." But even as I said the words, a cold knot of fear began to form in my stomach. The place was remote. Really remote. The nearest town was miles away, and the trails around here weren't exactly popular. Hearing another person out here, especially in weather like this, was more than just unusual. It was downright eerie. I stepped to the edge of the deck, squinting into the darkness. The rain was coming down in sheets, and the flashes of lightning were the only thing giving me brief glimpses of the woods beyond. For a moment, I thought I saw something. Figure, maybe, standing just at the edge of the trees. "There's someone out there," I whispered, not wanting to alarm Cass any more than she already was. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Maybe we should go inside." "Yeah, maybe you're right," I agreed, trying to keep my voice steady. The last thing I wanted to do was freak her out. Something about this situation was setting off alarm bells in my head. We quickly moved back inside, shutting and locking the door behind us. I pulled the curtains closed, hoping to shut out whatever was lurking out there in the storm. Cass was visibly shaken, and I didn't blame her. This was supposed to be a fun weekend, and now it felt like we were in the middle of some horror movie. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the storm outside. Every creak of the old mobile home, every gust of wind that rattled the windows, made us jump. I could tell Cass was trying to stay calm. I could see the fear in her eyes. I felt it too, that gnawing sense of dread that something was very wrong. "I'm sure it was just a lost hiker," I said, more to reassure myself than her. "They'll probably just keep going." Cass nodded, but she didn't look convinced. Neither was I, really. After a few more minutes, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know if that person was still out there. I got up and walked over to the window, carefully pulling the curtain aside just enough to peek out. What I saw made my blood run cold. There, standing just a few feet from the deck, was a man. He was soaked to the bone, his clothes clinging to his body, his face partially obscured by the rain. But what really scared me was how still he was. He wasn't moving, wasn't even trying to get out of the rain. He was just standing there, staring at the house. I quickly closed the curtain and backed away from the window, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what to do. Should I go out there? Should I confront him? Or should I just stay inside and hope he went away? "Cass," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "There's someone out there. Just stay calm, okay?" "What? Who is it?" she asked, her voice rising in panic. "I don't know, but I don't think they're here for help." Cass's eyes widened and she clutched the blanket tighter around herself. "What do we do?" "I don't know," I admitted. Maybe we should just wait and see if they leave. If they come to the door, we'll figure something out." We sat in tense silence for what felt like an eternity, listening to the rain and the occasional rumble of thunder. Every now and then, I thought I could hear footsteps outside, but it was hard to tell over the noise of the storm. My mind was racing, trying to come up with a plan, but nothing seemed right. All I knew was that I didn't want to open that door. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the storm began to die down. The thunder became more distant, and the rain slowed to a steady drizzle. The air inside the mobile home felt thick with tension, and I could see Cass was on the verge of tears. "We can't just sit here," she said finally, her voice trembling. "We have to do something." I knew she was right, but I didn't want to admit it. Thought of opening that door, facing whoever was out there, filled me with a fear I hadn't felt since I was a kid. But I couldn't let that fear paralyze me. "Okay," I said, taking a deep breath. "Okay, I'm gonna check it out. Stay here." "No, please don't go out there," Cass begged, grabbing my arm. "What if they're dangerous?" "I'll be careful, promise," trying to sound braver than I felt. "Just stay here and lock the door behind me." I gently pulled her hand off my arm and made my way to the front door. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I unlocked the door as quietly as I could, then slowly turned the handle, bracing myself for whatever might be on the other side. The door creaked open, and I stepped out onto the deck, cold air hitting me like a slap in the face. I looked around, my eyes darting from shadow to shadow, but there was no sign of the man I had seen earlier. The woods were dark and silent, the only sound the soft patter of rain on the leaves. I took a few cautious steps forward, peering into the darkness. Maybe he had left. Maybe he had just been some lost hiker after all, and he had moved on when the storm started to let up. I wanted to believe that. Something told me it wasn't that simple. Suddenly, a flash of lightning lit up the sky, and for a brief moment, I saw him, standing at the edge of the woods, staring at me. He was closer now, only about 20 feet away. His eyes were wide and empty, and his mouth was twisted into a grotesque grin. My breath caught in my throat, and I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my own feet. I slammed the door shut and locked it, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the key. "He's still out there," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. "He's just standing there." Cass didn't say anything, but I could see the fear in her eyes. She was terrified, and so was I. We were trapped in this tiny mobile home with no way to call for help, no way to get out. I felt completely powerless. "We need to stay calm," I said, more to myself than to her. We'll just wait it out. He can't stay out there forever." But as the minutes ticked by, it became clear that whoever this person was, they weren't going to leave. Every time I looked out the window, he was there, just standing at the edge of the woods, watching. The rain had all but stopped now, but the air was still thick with the smell of wet earth and pine needles. I was about to suggest we try to make a run for the car when there was a sudden loud bang at the bedroom window. Cass let out a scream, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. I grabbed the rifle from under the bed, my hands shaking as I loaded it. Another bang, this time from the kitchen window. It was like they were trying to break in, testing each window, each door. My heart was racing, my mind screaming at me to do something, anything, to protect her. I moved to the front door, positioning myself so that if anyone tried to come through, I'd be ready. I could feel the cold metal of the rifle in my hands, and for a moment, I felt a surge of confidence. I wouldn't let them hurt us. They tried to get in, I'd shoot. The banging continued, echoing through the small mobile home like a drumbeat. Cass was huddled in the bedroom, crying softly, and I felt a wave of guilt for dragging her into this. This was supposed to be a fun weekend, and now we were fighting for our lives. Then, without warning, the banging stopped. The sudden silence was almost worse than the noise. I held my breath, listening, waiting for the next move, and then I heard it. A soft, shuffling sound outside the front door, like someone was trying to turn the handle. My grip tightened on the rifle, my finger hovering over the trigger. I was ready. I wouldn't let them get in. The shuffling continued for a moment. Then there was a soft click. The door slowly began to creak open. I didn't hesitate. I yanked the door open the rest of the way and fired the rifle into the air, the sound deafening in the quiet night. Figure on the other side of the door stumbled back, letting out a deep, guttural yell before turning and running into the woods. I stood there, panting, the adrenaline surging through my veins. I could hear at least 2 voices shouting as they disappeared into the darkness, the sound growing fainter until there was nothing left but the distant rumble of thunder. I stood there for a long moment, the rifle still raised, my hands shaking. I didn't know who they were or what they wanted, but they were gone now. We were safe. For now. Finally, I lowered the rifle and went back inside, locking the door behind me. Cass was still in the bedroom, her face pale and tear-streaked. I sat down next to her, pulling her into a tight hug. "It's okay," I whispered, trying to convince myself as much as her. "They're gone." We spent the rest of the night huddled together, too scared to sleep, listening to every creak and groan of the old mobile home. The men didn't come back. When the first light of dawn broke through the trees, we packed up our things and left, not daring to stay another minute. As we drove away, the events of the night before played over and over in my mind. Who were those men? What did they want? I didn't have any answers, and maybe I never would. All I knew was that something had changed. That place, once a sanctuary, now felt tainted, like a shadow had fallen over it. I've been back to the mobile home a few times since then, always with my family. Never alone. But the memory of that night still haunts me. Every time I hear the sound of thunder, I'm taken back to that dark, stormy night, and I can't help but wonder, what would have happened if I hadn't fired that rifle? What if they had gotten in? The storm may have passed, but the fear it brought with it still lingers, like a stain that will never fully wash away.